It's a coalescing of key and extraordinary people at particular points in time that make something possible. Yeah, sometimes you can create the ground for that, but you can't make up the people.
You had to have the right person do the private members bill. There had been people who had been wanting to do that, but it was being able to absolutely stand the barrage of on all sides that would have come from not just the anti-choice people, but also within the party. You have to be able to stand firm and be able to do it, and Candy was the person to be able to do that.
With Candy Broad prepared to table the legislation, the bill was written to reflect current clinical practice and community standards, and in a way supporting the years of advocacy that would see it passed unamended. The first tabling of the private members bill occurred on the eve of Premier Steve Brack's resignation, and so it was delayed. But when John Brumby became Premier and immediately affirmed his commitment to changing the law, it was time to drive the legislation through both Houses of Parliament.
I guess abortion has always been an issue that political leaders have generally shied away from. It's always traditionally been a divisive issue. But the more I thought about that, and the more I thought particularly of the aspirations of so many women in our community, here was an opportunity to give the Parliament a vote, on essentially on a conscience basis, and to do it on the basis of a bill which was properly framed and properly constructed.
Oh, it's like a bolt from the blue. It's like receiving a lollipop from your mum when you thought she was going to growl at you. It was just fantastic.
And it was only less than a month after the new Premier came into effect that he announced that abortion law reform would be referred to the Victorian Law Reform Commission. So it was a very decisive statement and really set a very definitive new direction. And I was appointed as Minister of Women's Affairs, and myself and Daniel Andrews, the Minister for Health, and the Attorney General Rob Hulls were asked to do some work in developing terms of reference.
That then put me and all of the people who'd been involved in the campaign in a position where we were able to swing into support for the government process, to participate in the Law Reform Commission's consultations, to provide to them all of the information and evidence that we had assembled from individuals and organisations who were supporting law reform. So we had done a lot of work which we were able to hand over, and many of the individuals and organisations who had supported the private members bill were then able to swing into supporting the government bill and the Law Reform Commission's consultations.
And people like Daniel Andrews the Minister for Health, had enormous pressure on him because he was Catholic. And he got pressure from his old school, pressure from his old friends, pressure from the Catholic Church. In my view, absolutely disgraceful. But he stood there and said, this is a government decision and I will support it.
To suggest that more women will seek and receive terminations because this Parliament removes sections of the Crimes Act that have been summarily ignored and set aside for the better part of 4 decades does, in my view, Victorian women a real disservice.
On the other hand, Maxine had always supported it. But Maxine should be remembered not only for her ability but for her courage too. She was in the most marginal seat, and still is, in Victoria. Fancy taking that issue on in the most marginal seat.
And so they were putting really their livelihoods at risk potentially, they believed. And so it was really important for us to provide that peer support for them. So we would have MPs who had been and led abortion law reform in other states come out and speak to them so they could hear directly about what were the best strategies to apply.
I do believe very strongly in women's right to choose, and so it had been one of those round the dinner table conversations rather than anything more than that. But of course the whole experience of the debate itself and passing the legislation took it to a massively different level. Like many of us, I've heard harrowing stories of women who were victims of incest, rape or domestic violence. Some of these were particularly vulnerable women who have gone on and become pregnant as a result.
I knew already that it was very important that we were not partisan. I had already had some outreach from the Liberals, and I knew it was important that they did not perceive, so we did not look, and we weren't in any way aligned with Labor.
I think this is one of those areas where the state parliament or our statutes lag well behind the views of the community and also the common law, and I think that's part of the reason why I thought it was important at some stage that the law made by the parliaments caught up with the current clinical practice and also what the courts were deciding as was the right legal framework.
Almost without exception, the journalists that we spoke to were supportive, that they had either pro-choice positions or they weren't anti-choice, and that they were open-minded. And that made an enormous difference. And I don't think that that's always acknowledged. It was just a reflection of public opinion. More than 80% of people believed that abortion shouldn't be in the Crimes Act.
In a conscience vote, it is you. You're out there with your raw values, your emotions, your feelings, and your convictions.
The Abortion Law Reform Bill before the House today will provide clarity and certainty for women, health practitioners and the community. The bill acknowledges and reflects community attitudes and current clinical practice that exist in relation to the care and management of women seeking an abortion. The campaign for the abortion law reform has been a long one. I'm pleased to say that Victoria now has legislation before the House to provide Victorians with a modern legislative framework that reflects widespread community views and current clinical practice in relation to this important women's health issue. I commend the bill to the House.
It was just a very emotional moment. I think I and others who'd been working for that moment for so long were caught a little unawares by the emotion of the moment when a government minister got to her feet and read that second reading speech, introduced the bill, and it suddenly became for the first time very, very real. And we then really got our hopes up that this was actually going to happen.
The debate on the bill to decriminalise abortions was long and emotional.
Abortion is not a crime, in my view, it is a medical procedure.
Abortion has been safely and legally available at the option of the woman in Victoria for decades.
Victoria really will be the abortion state.
I've become disturbed in recent weeks at the extreme tone of some abusive correspondence and phone calls that my electorate office staff and I've received.
I was there every moment of the debate in the upper house, along with members of the team. I remember so well sitting next to Joan Kerner and Marilyn Beaumont and Kay Setchers and the others, and just holding hands and just willing this through.
Abortion is set to become legal for the first time in Victorian history.
Many MPs didn't declare their position until the last minute, but in the end the majority chose to support the bill, and it was a clearer margin than many expected.
Ayes 23, noes 17. The ayes therefore have it.
The unusual thing for me was that whereas my focus had really been on women and the women that I see, our patients, and making things better for them, what I hadn't anticipated was that I felt really good. I thought, well, I am no longer a criminal. There's no way that anyone can now say that I'm doing anything criminal at all. Whereas before, there had been ambiguities.
It was a dreadful period, and as in women's lives that they couldn't get access to this safely. And it's still around the world. Women, one woman dies every minute around the world from preventable reproductive health services just because they don't have access to safe legal abortion and safe delivery. And that's how society has seen women, so I cried.
To find that you still have doctors that will not provide information, that in our area, that we have chemists that will not provide the pill or condoms is appalling. We need to still work and work hard at making real change, educating women about contraception, educating young women, and educating the public about what is needed.
If you want to hold on to women's choice and women's right to shape their own lives, you don't have to be forever active yourselves, but you do have to be forever vigilant.